Hi, my name is Nani, and I adore the Sims GBA game. If you're not familiar, let me give you a brief introduction. The Sims series is famous for its simulation of real life, or perhaps murder simulation depending on your playstyle. Created by Will Wright, the series immediately saw success as the only thing of its kind. Due to that success, the overlords at EA who ended up with the rights to the series were not going to stop there, and so spin-off games began to be made, starting with SimCity. I won't go into detail about that game, but needless to say it was a big deal, once upon a time. But when it came to handheld games, there had to be a shake-up if they were going to make a formula that worked in a small form factor. They couldn't just create the standard Sims experience. The screen size, control scheme, and processor make that an unlikely prospect. Introducing Sims Busting Out for the GBA. Please note that all three games I will mention in this video had other separate versions, merely sharing the same branding or some other small things. I will probably cover the PS2 games in another video, as they were rather interesting in their own right. Anyways, back on topic. So Sims Bustin' Out was neither a classic Sims game or a city builder. Instead, you played as a single Sim who's just moved in with their uncle who runs a farm. You still have to address your needs bar, but you have first-hand control of your character, and the game even had a loose storyline. It was mostly about you finding your own place in the town, but there was individual quests you could do with their own small stories. Besides exploration, you could skill up, talk to NPCs to become popular, which was a vital, albeit simple mechanic. You could buy items and furnish whatever house you would progress to at the time. To make money, you'd play fun but simple minigame, and to get a promotion in the minigame and make it harder but more rewarding, you'd simply level up the relevant skill and get the right amount of money. The game had a very memorable soundtrack, with a notable standout being the sewer theme for whatever reason. This unique experience of life simulation, adventure, and story really made the game stand out to me when I first played it, and still does to this day. The only game that really had that kind of balance at the time was the GTA series, as far as I can tell. And even then, it didn't have the same level of life simulation, instead leaning towards action. To this day, I've yet to find an experience that's similar to this GBA trilogy, if you want to call it that. But Sims Busting Out was not the best that Maxis would offer out of the three games. A simple change in the next game would further whittle down the formula to its best aspects. There were two more games for GBA. One was Herbs, Sims in the City, and the other was Sims 2. Herbs really felt like a level up from the previous entry, acting as a sequel of sorts, with some characters from Bustin' Out making a return in this game. The biggest changes are apparent very early on. Firstly, you do not rely on the story to get yourself a new house. Now it was up to you which place to get, and you could stay there as long as you liked. You could even upgrade security and fire protection, among other things, to make it even better than before. The chatting minigame, if you want to call it that, also became more streamlined. And although it did mean the loss of some funny lines, it made it more accessible and faster paced. The biggest change, however, was story. I mentioned before that Sims Busting Out only had a loose story to it, and while it did have some great smaller stories, they were mostly disconnected from each other. Well, that all changed in Herbs, introducing the series antagonist Daddy Big Bucks. Besides a fantastic name, this guy also brought a truly overarching plot about his quest to turn Albania into a little more than an overpriced theme park. He sets himself as your enemy right away too, buying out the building you work in and firing you on the spot. Now it's personal. For a little while your co-worker Chris agrees to let you stay in the unfinished penthouse until you can find a new place. Still, you are confused as to why Mr. King, your previous boss, would allow this, and soon you meet a pre-recorded message that explains his reasoning. Having worked you hard to make up for your free lodging, Chris finally asks a favour. She's accidentally locked herself in the building. Since you owe her, you begrudgingly agree to break into the office of one of Big Buck's lawyers to get a spare key. But, of course, you end up caught in the act, and thinking that you're onto him, Big Bucks quickly flexes his influence and gets you arrested. This is where the overarching plot of you, and eventually the whole city, versus the evil Daddy Big Bucks really begins. Now granted, he wasn't the best written villain ever made, but his comically evil nature was almost a gag in the game, and it didn't take itself too seriously. The plot made the game far more engaging. In the last game you made friends just because your goals told you to, mostly. But this time you were gathering allies against Daddy Big Bucks. The story and the quests all fed into each other to some extent, and the city itself was brimming with atmosphere. The soundtrack once again was fantastic, and further fed into the atmosphere of this flawed but charming little city. And when I say little, I do mean little. It was basically a caricature of a city. It gave you the idea of districts without being too large just for the sake of it. Everything on screen had a purpose for the most part, and that cut down on travel time considerably. Even Busted Out had a few overly long roads with nothing to do in them. But there was lots of cool things to find and do in this game, like the hoverboard for getting around town, or unique items people give you sometimes. My favourite was probably the genie lamp. It was cool and convenient at the same time. There was also a simple perk system, which you bought from using sizzle beads. Sizzle beads were obtained by making friends, further emphasizing the need to socialize. In some cases it's only my opinion, but herbs really seem to outmatch Busted Out in so many ways. The developers have clearly put their hearts into this game. Where Busted Out was a rough gem that was just being discovered, herbs was the finished product, cleanly cut and polished to a shine. Although with that being said, I'm really not sure if herbs is my favourite of the three, because Sims 2 changed some of the formula once again, and flourished in a way completely unique to the previous two games. In The Sims 2 you weren't the hero anymore, you were the lackey of Daddy Big Bucks, the returning character. You were an actor playing the hero in a Truman Show-esque way, by setting up in a town with unsuspecting denizens. They didn't know it, but everything that happened now was being filmed by Daddy Big Bucks, and the various events were usually set up for the sake of episodes. Daddy Big Bucks had no limits, even hiring real aliens to invade for an epic episode, because real actors were just too expensive. The game had very much moved even closer to story, but in order to do so it had to sacrifice a few things. This time, the game was somewhat set in episodes that you could pick, and even replay. Characters would remember your reputation, and your house and the stuff within it would remain as you left them, but the episodes were self-contained for the most part, affecting who could show up and when. Socialization was even simpler, and relied mostly on dice rolls. Not having to remember everyone's favourite subjects was nice, but losing a bunch of socials to chance was a bit frustrating. Since your house was an important part of the setting, you could no longer buy your own place. You did have the option to change the interior theme however, so that was something. The game had a slightly different feeling. Some of the minigames were even adverts that you starred in that showed up in specific parts of the story. It may seem on the surface that Sims 2 stripped away some of the enjoyment of herbs. It's true that everything was a little more linear, and the setting was totally different, but that doesn't mean it was necessarily worse than herbs. Sims 2 gave us the best writing Max has had to offer. Absurd and fantastic episodic stories that leaned into the more ludicrous and comical writing from the game before. Aliens, monsters, you name it. There really wasn't any limit to what they could do, and that's why I found the game so damn fun. Strange Town was an eerie but fascinating place. There was always a new twist waiting around the corner. I can't think of a single episode that actually bored me. Whilst in herbs, there was a quest here and there which was a little bit tedious. Socialization, for example, was not about a set percentage you were being forced to fill. Now you're just doing certain kinds of social, such as romance or intimidation, as part of your bonus objectives. And even though it had issues early on, you could upgrade your social abilities to be more effective, giving you a new path of progression in the game. Each episode had 4 factors that you had to appeal to in order to satisfy the audience. Story was a given, but there was also socialization, specifically the type you were assigned at the beginning of the character creation. So essentially fulfilling the promise of acting in character. Third was an errand for some odd reason, and lastly was a hidden want, such as a bonus objective that you had to find and complete. The score you achieved could then be spent on bonuses, such as the house themes I mentioned earlier, or even a bike to get around on. It added a level of completionism that the games didn't have before, but ironically also gave freedom. If you just wanted to enjoy the story, you no longer had to worry about roadblocks like popularity in the previous games. Having a set house may be a downside in some way, but it had so much character because of the commitment to the setting. I suppose I should mention the soundtrack here, but once again, perfectly blends with the atmosphere of the bizarre town they were going for. Now that we've given each game a little time in the sun, let's close up by explaining why they're classics. One thing that games all have in common is that they're unique. Point to me a game series that blends the elements of socialization, minigames, adventure and life sim, like in these games, because I want to play that. The developers clearly cared about each of these games. They are full of memorable characters and moments that will stick with me. Each of the 3 games are distinct enough from each other that they all have a unique feeling and reason to play. The soundtracks were fantastic. These are GBA games, and the music puts some console games to shame. With handhelds like the Switch being very powerful now, The idea of another game coming along that feels remotely like these games feels slim. Because they aren't grand in scale, they're heartfelt and do best with what they have. The focus was on fun. The worlds didn't need to be big or filled with a million identical quests. They only ever tried to be themselves, and as a result offer something few games have done or will do in the future. Anyway, I've been your host Nani. How do you feel about these games? Have you played them? And if so, which one is your favourite? Let me know down in the comments. Be sure to like this video if you watched it. This is a new series, and a lot of hard work went into this. You could even subscribe if you want more. I shall be covering more GBA gems in the future. Also, if you enjoy listening to me, perhaps you like my gaming streams on twitch.tv/Buffulao. Links in the description below. Thanks for watching. Until next time, bye bye!